We are here again. Apprenticeships are becoming more and more important nowadays when there's a growing need to find ways for effective reskilling that will meet the needs of a constantly changing job market with increasing demands. It is a pleasure and honor for the Chamber and for myself to welcome Mr. Robert Lerman, Fellow at the Center of Labor, Human Resources and Population of the Urban Institute in DC, who has written extensively on the benefits of apprenticeships, providing evidence of the way they increase skills and productivity. So I think he's the right person to talk to us about apprenticeship. Hello, Mr. Lerman. Thank you for
Hello.
being with us.
Nice to see you.
Nice
Thank
to
you
see
for
you.
inviting me.
Well, it's a pleasure. Um, to what extent apprenticeship can benefit young people by providing them a hands-on experience on an actual working environment? How businesses can benefit by utilizing such programs?
Well, yeah, I think the great thing about apprenticeship is that it can work both for the student, worker, young person, and for the employer. One of the big benefits is what I call engagement, student engagement. Because what happens in an apprenticeship is that you're actually implementing and using what you learn in any related academic course. You are earning money and you're contributing to production. And so the employer is investing. The employer is investing by paying wages, by having a mentor, and sometimes providing some of the money for the off-job learning. But the employer gains from the production of the apprentice, and often a number of indirect benefits, such as improving morale, increasing the productivity of coworkers. And we've been looking at that a lot in a new evaluation. We'll have several papers coming out in the next few months.
Great. To be successful in an apprenticeship program has to be sustainable, of course. What are the key elements of an apprenticeship program to be successful and the role of the state and the business community in this, for this?
So you can't do an apprenticeship without an employer. And in the United States, where we're a bit short is marketing to the employers how the benefits of apprenticeship can be good for them. So the first step is to what we call selling and organizing, because apprenticeships are typically sold, not bought. You have to use either intermediaries or others to help employers, especially in the United States, where we have a registered system that sometimes creates frictions, and get that program started. Now, once it's started, for it to be sustainable, a key is that the apprentice is put to work right away, is working, is adding to production. That gives the worker a sense of contribution as well. It improves the morale overall, and it makes the apprenticeship more sustainable because the work that the apprentice does, you'd have to hire somebody else to do in any event. That's one big element of sustainability. A second one is good mentoring, that we have, and we've been doing some mentor training at Urban Institute. We've created a mentoring guide for apprenticeships, especially youth apprenticeships, on our website. But good mentoring is essential. And then the government role, I would say, is to provide funding for the off-job learning, because after all, the off-job learning, the courses benefit the worker overall. It's not just within that company. So there's what we would call an externality, because the courses are portable. So that's I think where the government should come in. And in the United States, the key is to help fund the intermediaries that can sell employers on apprenticeship and help them organize those apprenticeships. We've seen in other countries and even within the United States that if you have talented people who know business and who know apprenticeship and who know how to communicate with business people, let's say have good sales capabilities, that can greatly increase the likelihood that an employer will adopt apprenticeship. And once they adopt it, that is likely to continue because, as I say, they can yield, they get a lot of benefits from it. But in my view, the government should pay for the off-job learning, have very good vocational teachers, as your last speaker had, the Wake Community College. That's government funded off-job learning. And that will lessen the burden on employers. But unless you get the employer to adopt apprenticeship, you don't really have an apprenticeship.
Do you have apprenticeship programs that are driven directly from the U.S. government, or you're more relying on state level, let's say, support?
Well, we have too complicated a system in the United States. We have an Office of Apprenticeship in Washington, and half of the states can register the employer's program within that. Then we have about half the states that have their own state agencies. And sometimes the state agencies are actually slower than the federal government. And then we have a number of what we would call unregistered apprenticeship programs. Some of them are very good, but we don't know enough about them. We've starved the apprenticeship system in the United States. So, I mean, we've provided very, very little money until recently, and even recently, the increases are nowhere near what other countries provide and what you need for a viable system that could perhaps incorporate maybe 25% of a cohort. Now, in recent years, the government has provided some grant funding. We at Urban Institute have received some of that funding and have gone out and helped create apprenticeships. But to scale the system, we need a much bigger effort.
Mm-hmm. We are aware that in US are industries that are providing apprenticeship opportunities to high school graduates. That essentially means that youngsters can be educated and acquire skills without being enrolled to academic institutions and advance in their professional career later on. Can you please tell us how widespread and effective are these programs, and to what extent these programs benefit the economy and the employment?
Well, unfortunately, they're not that widespread in the United States yet. But in some places, there's a real effort. So, for example, in the state of Iowa, there are 50 high schools that are registered apprenticeship sponsors. In Wisconsin, there's a viable youth apprenticeship program where students, even during high school, start their apprenticeships. But these are less common than normal, and we haven't managed to scale the system. I strongly believe that high school graduates, and even starting in high school, can be a big benefit, especially for the students, but also for the companies. Now, remember that at the high school level, they're not earning that much. So that's appropriate for an apprentice wage. But apprentice wage will be more than what they're earning sitting in school all day. We've had actually in the United States a very big decline in the share of youth who hold jobs, who used to be part-time jobs, were far more common for our young people than they have been today. And so fewer of them get the kind of work experience that we need for what we would call employability skills, showing up on time, knowing how to take instructions, knowing how to ask questions, all of these skills that you need in a normal job. Our young people have gotten fewer of those jobs over the years because of the emphasis on what I call the academic only approach. But if we combine some academics with work experience toward a career, and that's one of the key things, because one great element of apprenticeship is the pride that an apprentice gains after completing an apprenticeship. They are now part of what used to be called a community practice. So if they're in IT or in a healthcare job or in an automotive position, they know that they know a lot more than their friends who have just general education. They're part of a group that has pride in their profession. And that pride is, I'd say, a critical part of the motivating aspects of apprenticeship. And it's something that I've seen in individual cases, but again, we don't have the scale that we need yet in the United States.
Technology, we know that it's advancing very rapidly nowadays, and
Yes.
it's affecting business and mainly industries, the way they operate. What kind of apprenticeship programs are needed today?
Well, that's another thing that's good about apprenticeship is that the match between the worker and the career position is built into an apprenticeship, because an employer is not going to create an apprenticeship if he or she does not think that in 2 or 3 years I'm going to need people with that level of skills. And as Scott Rawls mentioned, a lot of the skills that are needed are not necessarily 4-year BA level positions, but more detailed positions that involve cybersecurity and healthcare, in technical positions in healthcare, advanced manufacturing, robotics, maintenance, all of these types, logistics, all of these types of positions are well learned within an apprenticeship. That doesn't mean that the apprentice is not taking courses, but the advanced equipment that the apprentice is using is on site. You don't have to have an academic institution exhaust their budget on buying the latest equipment year after year, because the equipment is part of the student's learning process at the work site. So apprenticeship, now, some people argue that you'll learn in an apprenticeship, but over time, those skills will erode. That isn't what we see. Usually, the apprentice has a very deep knowledge of the skills in that profession. And as that profession incrementally changes and upgrades, the apprentices, the former apprentice or journey person, they sometimes say, but completer, can go along with that. Usually when people change jobs, they change to something adjacent to what they're now doing. They don't usually go from one total thing to a complete other field. And even there, the apprenticeship gives our young people all the employability skills that they need. A lot of companies complain that the problem-solving skills, the ability to work independently, but also work in teams, all of these kinds of skills are what are lacking. And the only way you can gain those skills is at the workplace. There are just a number of skills. So, for example, let's say you learn how to do something, but at the workplace, they expect a certain speed. They expect you to finish your paper in 3 days, not 2 weeks. You don't get an extension. So so you can only learn those. And the other thing about it is that in the classroom, you're learning kind of yourself. It's in a workplace. There's nothing wrong with asking for help from a coworker. You work as a team, so there are a lot of things that the workplace offers that a pure academic learning approach does not. That doesn't mean that I believe that four-year colleges are bad or anything like that. I think that there's a place for a diversity of opportunities, and that apprenticeship is a very, very good first step for people and can yield a really good career. But I'm not I taught economics in a four-year college. I see the benefits of that. I would have liked my students to have a little more real-world experience when they're learning economics, but in any event, I think we need this diversity of opportunities.
Of course. Well, you're very expert. I went through your bio, and I was really impressed with, first of all, of course, with your studies, but also you've been a consultant to governments also regarding apprenticeship programs. So my question is, have you have any other country besides US approach you for some, let's say, advices regarding their apprenticeship programs?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm part of a group. We have the International Institute for Innovative Apprenticeship that we have conferences every few years. But I mean, I learned from abroad. I learned from especially the case of Switzerland, to some extent Germany. But I think in those countries, there is a big difference between what happens in the US, in the sense that I'm talking now about youth development. In those countries, you become mature a little faster. I mean, you're working alongside adults earlier on. We have a long period of adolescence in the United States, and where you're not really, even if you don't go to college and you get a job, they're not really adult type jobs very often. Whereas I would say in Switzerland and Germany that they are far more incorporated in the adult world at a younger age, and so I try to learn from elsewhere. The UK I learned from because they created a system where they gave incentives to intermediaries to work with companies, and they have now a whole industry of these intermediaries. I'm not saying their system works perfectly, but on that dimension, it showed that if you have a lot of intermediaries going out and helping to stimulate employers to do apprenticeship, that can scale up a system. They went from 150,000 apprentices to 850,000 apprentices in a period of about 8 to 10 years. And they could only have done that with that kind of effort. So I try to learn from elsewhere. I try to explain what the U.S. experience is, but we have a long way to go.
Well, here in Greece, we're trying, to actually put in place another, let's say, framework. Actually, Greece, we are having this so-called Resilient Recovery Fund from the European Union, and part of it will be devoted, to apprenticeship, to further education, and I'm sure that your expertise might be needed.
Well, I would recommend a couple of things. I would recommend one. Maybe provide a pay for performance for intermediaries to get employers to start apprenticeships. Don't pay them unless they succeed, but pay them if they do succeed. Number one. Number two, I would make sure that you have standards, occupational standards, that work well with companies, but are rigorous and are serious. We have a project at Urban Institute on a center of excellence for occupational standards, where we're working with the private sector and even with public sector positions to create strong skill standards. Those would be the two most important things. And then ideally having some sort of third-party assessment plan over time, build that in. I think a lot of times I would not let the best be the enemy of the good. I would try to get those programs going, get employers used to employing apprentices, giving them help on making a good return on their investment in apprenticeship by making sure that the apprentices work well from the very beginning, and monitor how things are doing. Of course, as a researcher, I think research is critical, but I think it's very possible. I think employers are eager to get people who have those employability skills. They're willing to take a chance on young people at an appropriate wage. Don't keep the apprentice wages too high at the beginning. So those were some of the quick things that I would make
Very
sure
good
you do.
tips. Actually, we noted all these tips. We put them down, and I think we will send them to our government. This is actually very useful, what you said. By the way, I have a last question for you. You just
Sure.
recently established the American Institute for Innovative Apprenticeship. Could you tell us what is this about, and what's the objective and the goals of this institute?
Yes. Well, I actually worked with two others to start even another group called Apprenticeships for America. It's a new nonprofit. My original one was mainly information about different countries. This new one is more about trying to scale the U.S. system. We're building a network of intermediaries, and we're going to be much more in the advocacy sphere to try to encourage legislators and the administration to really scale up the system. We have a very tilted system toward what I call the academic-only system. We spend, massively more on higher ed, and even some of the workforce programs that don't work all that well than we do on apprenticeship. We were spending like $30 million. This is a big country. And just for scholarships alone for low-income college students, we're spending nearly $30 billion. That's 100 times more. And I don't think we need to spend $30 billion, but we're going to advocate for the kind of scale that we need, including those thoughts that I mentioned to reward intermediaries for working with companies, to reward the companies with at least the off-job learning costs, and to have a good system of skill standards and of verification. So that's the goal of the new nonprofit Apprenticeships for America.
Great. First of all, we would love to have you here, by the way, in physical.
I'd love to
Having
come.
also some people, of course, next TFTD, we will have you here. We will invite you, and having also some people from the administration also joining us in a conversation on how we can improve, the apprenticeship program. I have another question here. How work-based learning could expand opportunities for young students? I mean, what is the essence here? I mean, should we, let's say, place mandatory apprenticeship programs in order since we are living in an era that things are changing very rapidly, so people need to be educated continuously here. So, what is your vision on that?
I would say maybe in government contracts, you could give some advantage to those that had apprenticeship programs. I'm not a big fan of mandates because then business thinks, well, we're just doing it because we have to, not because we want to. And we have to help them see that they want to. I think, sometimes apprenticeship is looked at as something secondary. And, you have to make apprenticeships something that you aspire to, not resort to. In other words, a young person needs to aspire to the better apprenticeships. And that will create a kind of notion of why they're in that program. But as I mentioned, the work-based learning is critical. You cannot learn how to be effective without work-based learning. I mean, look at the best professions. Look at doctors. If you ask doctors, how much did they learn by doing versus medical school? They'll say 80% at least by practice, by what they did. You wouldn't just turn a doctor loose by just going to school alone and then all of a sudden start treating people. Even, in the law, they go to law school, but the real learning takes place through experience. That's true certainly in business and managing people. You can't simulate that through some artificial approach through simulation in classes. It really depends, and it's very context specific. Now, one of the final things I want to say about persuading companies, the thing about it, apprenticeship, is the apprentice is learning the occupational skills you need. You're going to need those occupational skills, but they're learning it in the context of the workplace that you have. So even if you didn't have an apprentice, you still have to have a lot of onboarding. You have to have a way of getting them familiar with how your business actually works. And each business has some unique features, even if it's in the same industry, banking or manufacturing or something. Each business has some unique features. An apprentice is going to learn not only the occupation, but the unique features of that business. And that's a big advantage. So when the business has now a cohort of apprentices, the business knows that every worker in that occupation has the same capabilities, the same feeling. And that's, as I say, a big advantage. And we need to promote that fully. And finally, I do think public service jobs, there may be some union opposition, but public service jobs, there should be no barrier for the government to create quality apprenticeships in a lot of the same skills that you need in the private sector, IT, managing, and a variety of other positions. Certainly in security, cybersecurity as well. Learning that way will make for a better worker.
Well, Mr. Lerman, they just told me that we ran out of time, and I really appreciate the conversation. I'm sure the audience of the TFTD also appreciated. I really enjoyed the conversation we had, and you really provide us, some very good tips about the apprenticeship. And I hope, we see you in live, in one of our next, let's say, conferences. Invite you here in Greece also to give some advices more in depth.
Okay, well, I'd be happy to come, and I'm rooting for you guys to. I know you've had a tough period a few years ago, and you're recovering. And even though the international environment is a little down now, I'm sure that Greece will come back, and
of course.
It would be great to have apprenticeship play a big part in that. I think you'll benefit greatly from it.
Well, thank you very much again, and hope to see you soon. Okay, have a good day.
Thank you.